we go. So as I was saying, we have two amazing speakers today on this session of Open Data for Climate Action. We have Namrata Mehta. Namrata is an urban innovation specialist at UN Habitat, where she leads the open innovation program called Climate Smart Cities Challenge. She has a depth of experience helping organizations adopt a design-led approach to developing solutions in and for emergency economic context. Namrata studied sociology at the University of Delhi and experimental media arts at the Sristri School of Art, Design and Technology in India when her relationship with data began. She has been a volunteer with DataMeet India, helping organize their annual open data camps, and also a founding member and organizer of Delhi Makers. Namrata comes to the UN with experience in philanthropy, the tech industry and government, and she's originally from India and is currently based in Gaborone, Botswana. Thank you for joining, Namrata. And our next speaker will be Chris Hagerbaumer, joined OpenAQ as executive director in March 2022. She provides strategic leadership, runs operations, manages the team, and cultivates collaborative relationships in pursuit of a core human right, the right to breathe clean air. She came to OpenAQ with 26 years of experience in the non-profit sector. At Oregon Environmental Council, she led the organization's air quality, climate, and transportation work, then served as deputy director. She learned the value of open data in a special projects role with mobility data, a non-profit that works internationally to ensure data quality and consistency related to transportation options. Chris served as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer in the Republic of Palau, and she earned her master's in public policy from the University of Chicago and her bachelor's in German literature from Reed College. Welcome, both of you. We are really excited for this session. Just a quick rules before we start. You will have 12 minutes for your presentation, and then we will open up for questions and discussion. And please, for our participants today, we have live interpretation. So you have a world before the in your Zoom that says interpretation. Please feel free to connect to the Spanish or English channel during the discussion. And 10 minutes before we end, we would like to wrap up this year and ask you, based on the many panels that we've been having throughout the year, which do you think should be our next topic for 2023, given that, as I said, today will be our last session. So having said that, I will now give the floor to Namrata.
Hi, everyone. I'm just having a little giggle to myself at the moment because the last time I spoke to Flor, she mentioned that a lot of people say I give the floor to Flor, and it's too bad you can't do that with my name, but I just remembered that right now. But thank you so much, Flor, and everybody else for having me here today. It's quite a pleasure, and also I'm really humbled because there is little that I will actually talk about data, especially open data, but I really do hope that I can learn a lot, and I'm really glad that Chris, I'm not following you because I am truly humbled to be speaking with this group here today. So I'm going to talk to you about the Climate Smart Cities Challenge, which is a program that I lead at UN Habitat. It is co-led by UN Habitat and a close partner of ours, Viable Cities, which is one of the Swedish innovation agencies. But of course, we have many, many other partners who I can quickly show you a slide of towards the end of my presentation. The Climate Smart Cities Challenge is an open innovation challenge. And perhaps by talking through the methodology that that the program has used, it'll give you a little bit of a sense of what we mean by that. We began the project in 2021 with an open call for cities. It was an international call, and we invited cities to come and work with us through an open innovation challenge approach. And then following that, we have sort of 4 different stages to the challenge that I will talk through each one of them. But today we are between stage 4 and 5. And so we began with the open call for cities. We then worked with the cities to define their challenges. We then opened those challenges out into an open competition for lots of different organizations to apply to. We then worked with those organizations that applied to identify finalists, and then with those finalists, brought them into collaborative teams to work more closely with the city. And we're just embarking on a new journey to what we call system demonstration. It's a new kind of approach that we, together with many different organizations, are experimenting with. It's a sort of response to the graveyard of pilots that many of us have had the experience of, unfortunately, dealing with. So just to begin and share with you about the open call. This is something that I said we put out at the beginning of 2021. We received almost 60 entries and from 54 different cities around the world, across 4 different continents. And then through a process of evaluation, where we really looked at the sort of political leadership and willingness in the city to work with us on this, as well as the kinds of different challenges that were submitted, we identified 4 cities to work with. And this really gave us a sense of what is top of mind when it comes to climate with the cities with the cities in our sort of UN Habitat network. And so Bogota, Colombia is one of the cities, Bristol in England, which is a little bit of an unusual suspect for UN Habitat to be working with, but a city that we have learned a tremendous amount from, Curitiba in Brazil, and Makindye Sabagabo in Uganda. So these are the 4 cities that we're currently working with. The second phase of the Climate Smart Cities Challenge was challenge definition. And here we really wanted to work with the 4 cities that we had identified, help them define what their mission was. Where do they really want to be in relation to some of the climate challenges that they were facing? And to get there and to define what that mission was, we worked with a very wide range of diverse stakeholders. And so that's a little bit the process that we went through, a series of 5 different sort of discovery workshops that we did with each of the cities. And through that process, we arrived at the 4 challenges that the Climate Smart Cities Challenge currently works with. So Bogota defined their challenge as reducing freight-generated greenhouse gases and air pollutants. So really curious to learn more about the organization, Chris, that you used to work with. I think that it would be tremendously valuable for us to really borrow from a lot of the wealth of work that's already been done before. Bristol was looking at a new model for delivering affordable and zero carbon homes. For them, it was very much about looking at the underlying structure of the viability and the financial model that would allow making affordable zero carbon homes possible. Curitiba took a different approach. They were looking at an integrated way of addressing energy, mobility, as well as waste challenges to create zero carbon neighborhoods. And Makindye Sabagabo, again, similar to Bristol, was focusing on zero carbon, energy efficient, affordable homes, but of course, very different contexts that they were working with. The third phase was the open competition. And here we took the challenges, put them into very detailed challenge briefs that are available on our website, which I can share with you. A lot of that was also looking at what is the existing data, right? Like a lot of the ways in which we identified what the challenges were was looking at, for example, greenhouse gas inventories in the different cities, but also different kinds of surveys that the cities had conducted and so on and so forth. And so a lot of that data is available in the challenge briefs that we developed. And so we opened the competition in, I would say exactly a year ago, in November last year. We received about 200 applications, shortlisted 100, and then from there, another process of sort of expert assessments and evaluations led us to 45 finalists. who we then took through a process of what we call team formation or team creation. And this was really a way for us to make sure that we were looking at the challenge holistically, and recognizing that not one single solution would be able to solve the challenges as we had defined them, but really we needed a portfolio of organizations to come together to be able to address the challenge that the and so we had a series of activities towards collaboration. We had kickoff sessions with the cities. We had workshops on intellectual property, because a lot of these organizations have new kinds of products that are energy saving, for example, or new kinds of construction technologies and materials and so on. And we also had sort of an introduction to systems thinking, but very importantly, we had coaches that worked with each of the finalists and the teams to kind of think about where they could complement one another, where they could collaborate better, what kind of challenges they might face in working with one another. And that we found to be tremendously valuable. So through that process, we actually received across the 4 cities 12 team proposals, from which we again went through a process of evaluation and pitching to identify 4 winning teams, 1 for each of the 4 cities, who have now received between the 4 of them, 400,000 euros for planning their system demonstrator. And so that's the phase we're in right now. And so we have 4 teams that we're working with together with the 4 cities that we were originally working with. And each of these teams have defined and turned the challenge around in a solution. And so that's something I'm going to share with you a little bit more. I hope I'm doing okay with time. So Bogota has a team called Green Roots, and they're looking at creating an integrated artificial Internet of Things, a platform specifically for freight transportation. Bristol is looking at, they have a great team that's sort of come together that has some very traditional actors, but some new technologies as well, to create decent housing for all using carbon neutral, climate smart solutions. Chiba has focused, the team has focused a little bit more on waste management as a sector, and their aim is to create urban micro areas for energy reduction, recycling, active mobility, and environmental education. And Makinde Sabogabo has sort of taken a community approach to housing, both at the individual, but also at the neighborhood level for climate and environmentally friendly cities. Now, here is where we're beginning to think more closely about data as it relates to, I would share you the example of 3 of the solutions that we're working with, beginning with Bogota. So Bogota is I would say, our most data forward solution, because it is a platform or a marketplace that the team that the city has identified will be developing to connect logistics providers, transporters, shippers, and receivers as a way of optimizing freight management and flow transportation through the city, but also calculating the impact on the environment, especially as it relates to air pollution, but also greenhouse gas emissions. And the idea here is to make or develop a business model that works outside of the city context, if that makes sense. We've learned with working with cities, often there's a lot of limitations on how much they can innovate with solutions. And so in the case of Bogota, we've really learned that their motivation to working with us on this challenge is to have a sort of external solution provider that could really work very closely with them to develop a solution that could be sustainable because it fundamentally lives in the real world marketplace. And so a big challenge we have with that is, how do we ensure the data governance of this particular platform has the integrity and sustainability that it needs to have? And a question that I have, I used to work with Uber, for example. And so a question that I often ask is, how do we, if we could go back, right, to even Uber's example and say that they started off by actually collaborating very closely with cities, how would that have been done differently? And that's the kind of thinking that I'd love to do with this group and see how we can bring some of those ideas to the city of Bogota and really give them the kind of capacity and empowerment they need to work with private sector players like the solution that you're seeing. that you're seeing here. And so that's something that I'm really glad to have Floor's advice on, for example, but would very much love to broaden that kind of advisory request to the larger pool of people on this call. The second example that I wanted to share is from Curitiba, and the reason is because there are some sort of non-digital elements of the solution, but a large part of it is driven by a mobile application that uses gamification and other kinds of nudges to create sort of incremental behavioral change as it relates to recycling, waste management, waste segregation, energy consumption, and so on. So there's a lot of data that's going to be collected and generated through the app that this particular team called Smart Neighborhoods is going to create. And I think what's particularly interesting about this example is that we have two members of the team Smart Neighborhoods. One of them is local from Curitiba, understands the context really well, and has their own sort of platform that maps out a lot of these educational content, for example. And we have an organization based in Sweden that has been working very closely with cities there, as well as communities, on elements of behavioral change. And they're going to be coming together and sort of bringing together both of their mobile applications into one solution to be implemented in Curitiba. And so that's going to be quite interesting to follow, also because it has a very strong sort of consumer lens compared to the Bogota example that I just shared. And the third example that I want to share with you, and only because I think data isn't necessarily something that comes into perspective when we're building solutions. In the case of the first two examples that are very much, we're going to use data to create behavioral change or like make better decisions on how traffic needs to flow. But in this India, we have a team that's come together to build this wonderful design for housing that can be low carbon, energy efficient, and affordable. But every time we speak to the city, there continues to be a need for more data on the housing market in the city, for example, on the housing market as it relates to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, for example, as it relates to potential business models or like financial models that exist that can make something like this viable. And so even though we've come such a long way in identifying such wonderful partners to bring to the city, we're going back to some of the basics when it comes to the lack of data to make better decisions, to make some of these solutions and innovations actually viable in the context. And so that's why I wanted to share this particular example with you. I'm sure many of the organizations you work with face similar challenges, and it would be great to hear how you've worked to overcome them. So that's it. These are a lot of the partners that we're working with. It's a very, very colorful slide. And just to maybe shout out and give a thank you to everybody who's been a part of this particular initiative. It's been wonderful, and really hope that we can continue to sort of send messages about how the program is advancing and think about where we could potentially learn more from the work that you do. And so that's the Climate Smart Cities Challenge toward climate neutral cities, with the aim of mobilizing 300 million euros for investment towards climate neutral cities. I hope my time is okay. Floor, I will stop.
No, it's fine. Thank you, Namrata, for this really nice presentation. I really like that. Well, we discuss a lot in this implementation working group that every time that we combine data assets and we also we try to use data for the public good. There are also conversations around data governance emerging, but at the end of the time, you need open data, but you also need to connect open data with other sources to create value. And I think that all the examples that you brought to this team today are like showcasing the need for us to help other communities and to help system demonstrators on how to have data conversations to use data for the public good. So I will now turn to Chris for the presentation, and then we can have the discussion. For the ones joining, just send your questions in the chat, or else we can open up for question after Chris' presentation. So Chris, whenever you are ready.
Well, good day, everyone. And Namrata, that was so interesting. And thank you, Flor and others, for inviting me today. Let me find my presentation here. Sorry, now I have to figure out how to present it. Can you see?
Yes, you just have to click because you just move the slides.
Right, okay. I wanted to go into presenter mode. That was my issue.
I think you are.
Okay, well, all right. Well, I'm not in my own presenter mode. That's the thing. So my notes are not here. Okay. Why is that? Oh, well, I will just not maybe remember some things and maybe not remember others. So first of all, I'm Chris Hagerbaumer with OpenAQ, and I'm going to talk you all through basically what we do as an organization, who uses our data, and then how some of the challenges that we face in doing this. For some of you, you may not actually recognize how incredibly dangerous air pollution is. So I wanted to share that, number one, it's deadly. On average, it cuts our lives short by 2.2 years and as many as 10 years in the most polluted regions of the world. In fact, 1 out of 8 deaths worldwide are due to air pollution. And it's ubiquitous. Pretty much everybody is breathing unclean air as determined by the standards that are set by the World Health Organization. And as is true of many health problems, some people are harmed more than others. In the case of air pollution, that's children, the elderly, women, and people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. So our mission at OpenAQ is to provide universal access to air quality data to empower change makers around the world to solve this issue of air inequality, this fact that some people are breathing far more polluted air and have fewer resources to address it. So what we do, we're just a piece of the puzzle, but we aggregate and harmonize all of the publicly available air quality data that we can find in a one-stop free, transparent, and open source data platform. This is a representation of where we're getting data around the world. As you can see, it's typically in the more affluent parts of the world because that's where more data is collected. We do have more than 24 billion data points from 43,000 locations, and actually this number changes all the time. But that gives you an example of where we're getting this data. And it doesn't represent all the data that's out there because we still have to search for where is there more open data or get countries to open up their data if they don't. Sometimes a URL changes or a country, often because of political reasons, decides to take their data down. For example, our data in China is stale right now. So the challenges that we are trying to, that we are dealing with actually is the fact that governments produce data, and if they open it up, sometimes they might just be storing it on an Excel file buried deep in a website. Sometimes it's far more open than that. And it's in very disparate formats from a country level to, a country might be doing it the same, but subnationally, it might be different. And then everywhere across the world, it's different. So what we're doing is we're bringing all these different types of data onto our data platform and harmonizing them so that they're actually interoperable, and so that they can much more easily be used for analysis and research. This is just a visualization of how our pipeline works. Again, we're bringing all the different types of disparate data in, and ultimately folks can use an API. These are for the more technically proficient folks. Will be using the API for research and analysis. We have both real-time and historical data. And then what we have found is that over the course of time since we first launched in 2015 and became a nonprofit in 2018, and this was done a lot by volunteers before we became a real organization. What we have found is that we are primarily used by people who already know how to work with data. Academicians and other researchers and so on, who can take that data and do great things with it. But ultimately, we want more people who are in community to be able to use this data. So we worked with a UX designer over the summer and fall to find out what is it that people need to be able to use the data if they're not already pretty technically proficient. And I'm so excited that sometime in January we will be putting out a kind of a brand new website that allows people to work with that data and create visualizations and create other types of materials that they can then use to show decision makers what the air quality is like, and use that to convince folks to make a change in the world. A couple of years ago, we looked at basically the landscape of air quality data in the world. And we found that only about half of the world's governments are monitoring for air quality, therefore producing air quality data. And of those, only about 4 out of 10 shared it in some capacity, which leaves more than 1 billion people living in places without either monitoring and or the sharing of data. Now, I'm excited to say that in December we will have a brand new report out, and both monitoring and sharing have increased, although not to the extent that would be the very best. We gather information primarily on the pollutants noted here. These are kind of what they're called. They are what are called criteria pollutants in the United States. They're kind of the biggies, the major pollutants. We do ingest some other pollutants, but we don't actively seek them. And so since today we're really here to talk about climate change, I want to describe the interactions between air quality and climate change. Air quality, the primary ways that air pollutants impact the climate are, firstly, that ground level ozone is heating, in particular, the Arctic regions of our planet, which then has cascading effects. And also, what's really interesting is there are some pollutants, certain aerosols, that actually have a cooling effect on the planet. Think of a volcano and the aerosols that it spews out. They actually have a cooling impact on the planet, and some air pollutants are like that. Other aerosols have a warming impact, including black carbon. Then if we look at climate change, how is climate change impacting air quality? Well, if you think about a warming planet with warmer days, smog forms more easily. That's ground level ozone. So a lot more smog days around the world. And also forest fires, brush fires, wildfires. We know those are increasing with climate change, and those have very detrimental health impacts. So, and then some pollutants are like both greenhouse gases and air pollutants, in particular, ozone, which is the ground level ozone I mentioned, and then particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, and black carbon. And here's the thing, we can use climate arguments to say that we should be reducing fossil fuel use. We can use air quality arguments to be saying we need to reduce fossil fuel use, because in fact those sources of pollution are often one and the same. And kind of depending on who we're talking to, some folks might be more compelled by the air quality argument, others by the climate argument, but basically it's all going to be doing good. Here's a quote from someone at the World Bank. Air pollution and climate change should be tackled jointly with a focus on protecting people's health, particularly in low and middle income countries, to strengthen human capital and reduce poverty. So a whole bunch of folks make use of the data on our platform. I'm not going to go through this list, but I'll jump quickly to some use cases. As I mentioned, primarily, we are used by academicians and others to do scientific analysis, but we're also used for journalism and storytelling, for engaging citizens in understanding air quality, and for policy. Here's an example of an article written about how air pollution dropped during the early times of the pandemic. Bloomberg Green has a really interesting interactive platform that shows particulate matter levels and population density in cities around the world. This is a fun chat bot that's on Facebook Messenger and Twitter that communicates to people real-time air quality data. What are the hazard levels? How can you safeguard your personal health? And another one that is correlating, this app is meant to say, help people understand how bad air pollution is by helping people think of what they're breathing in the air in a day in a city. What's the equivalent of cigarettes smoked? Again, these are all examples of how the OpenAQ data platform is used. And then urban emissions. Surat Gutikunda in India runs urban emissions and is considered kind of like the major air quality person in that country. The work that he does, he uses OpenAQ data and other data to visualize trends on the effects of high pollution events and do other research that has really had an impact on the long-term air quality management plans in Delhi and across India. It is also used for public health alert systems. And then another thing that we really want to do is help basically upskill people in using data for air quality purposes. So we started a community ambassador program in 2021. We didn't have the capacity to do it in 2022, but we'll be putting out a call for participants in early 2023. And this has just been a great way to help emerging leaders in air quality learn how to use air quality data for their purposes and become ambassadors for better air quality data in their communities. And I would say that the challenge here is we worked with 5 folks in 2021. We're going to work with 10 in 2023. But that's not working with a lot of people. I mean, we don't have really the capacity to do more than that. So we want to kind of figure out how do we do this kind of training, but get it out further. And I'm sure folks have ideas if you do programs like this of how to do that. So that's basically a snapshot of what we do and how our data platform is used. And this is information on us. And I always want to thank the funders who support our vision of a world where everybody breathes healthy air enabled by universal access to data.
Thank you, Chris. I really liked your presentation. And what I like the most is that you are like, you have existing case studies and people accessing the platform, but you are still thinking on how communities and groups can access this data, can use this data for their own purposes, for communicating with their government, and so on. And the last thing that you mentioned, the ambassador program, so creating a community of practice or people who can become ambassadors of the initiative, but also intermediaries of information and help others in accessing the platform and using this data. So I really liked your presentation. Thank you, Namrata, and thank you, Chris. I will now open to questions. Anyone who would like to ask something, please feel free to open the mic.
Yeah, hello, I'm Ponslake speaking here for the records. Thank you, Namrata and Chris. I just wanted to what you do, how you relate it, the recent COP27 summit in Sharm el-Sheikh. A lot of things have gone through in relation to data and in to various issues. So I don't know how it fits and especially how you relate your work. Thank you.
Poncelet, you freeze for a bit, but your question is like, how do both of them relate the work on COP27 with their own work? Is it okay?
Yeah, yes,
okay.
And to the global, yes, and to the global south also.
Okay, great. Namrata, Chris?
I can just share my thoughts. I mean, of course, COP is something that UN Habitat has a presence at and its own sort of strategy, a lot of which looks at urban resilience. And we just launched a new program that focuses specifically on that called Surge. But to me, I think from the climate smart cities perspective, I think there's a few things that to me are very, very relevant for the kinds of conversations that have happened over the last 2 weeks. One has to do with what does it mean to work across private sector and public sector, and how do you actually bring those two sectors together towards a challenge, towards a mission, towards actually identifying the right solutions to get there. And innovation challenges like the Climate Smart Cities Challenge are one approach to making that happen more frequently, making that happen under a certain framework, allowing that sort of divide to kind of sort of melt away a little bit more. I think that's definitely a challenge that a lot of cities have, and I think that's important to sort of think about the role of cities within the entire climate change conversation. So that's one thing, is just bringing together the private and the public sector, and I should also say civil society, but I do have to say that that's something that we need to work more strongly on. The second is the conversation around finance. I think this is really, really important. And I think data as it relates to finance, as it relates to sort of climate change mitigation as well as adaptation is really, really important in how we make decisions, in where money is going to. And I think what's particularly interesting about this COP, I see quite a shift from, and this is something we experience as the Climate Smart Cities Challenge often. We kind of align ourselves more, because of the kind of work we're doing, to the mitigation side of the climate change problem. And I find that a lot of the urgency that is required is on the adaptation side. So how do we kind of bring those two together? Because they're both needed and they're both necessary and they require funding. And so I think the question around funding is extremely important as it relates to sort of the initial, the initial targets that have not been met, and now a new fund that has been announced, and sort of continuing to track how those play out, and continuing to push people who have the responsibility and accountability to make that happen.
And then my response with regard to COP27, there were some major clean air leaders there at the summit, and making that point really that if we reduce fossil fuel use, we're not only dealing with climate change, but with this incredibly dire situation related to air quality. Air quality is the fourth leading of all risk factors, fourth leading risk factor for death, and it's the #1 environmental factor. So it's something that needs to be addressed, and it just hadn't been as much part of that conversation. And then with regard to the global South, oh my gosh, we recognize that much more monitoring and sharing of data needs to occur. We ourselves don't do that monitoring, but what we consider ourselves to be part of the ecosystem that is arguing for better data and for shared data. And part of that is in philanthropy, generally a tiny percentage. We know that a tiny percentage of philanthropy goes to climate change, far less goes to air quality. And we are, by this new report that we're going to put out in December, we want to draw attention to philanthropy particularly in the global South, where it could support more monitoring, more air quality action. Africa is is the place where that statistic I had on 10 years of life taken off due to poor air quality. So that's certainly an area where we see huge gaps on the map as far as Southeast Asia and other places as well.
Thanks, Chris. Any other questions from the group?
I have a question for Chris, because we always bump into governments that are not that willing to share data. So what strategy do you use? Do you like make alliances with local organizations to advocate for the data being shared, or like which kind of strategies? We are always advocating for openness and making connections and making alliances, and sometimes being more pushy. But you know, what's your strategy when you find that reluctancy? Because we know it exists sometimes.
Well, excellent question. And one, I will say we're a very tiny organization. We were really just 2 people. We're now 4 people. So one of our ideas is to do exactly what you just said. That's part of this community ambassador program. Can we work with people on the ground in those areas who are the ones who should really be asking and who have the relationships necessary, right? So that's exactly what we want to do, but it's we're going to have to, again, with such a tiny team, it takes a little while to build those relationships. And you know, it's always important that they be non-transactional. We want people to be empowered to do that work themselves. So it's slow but steady progress.
Namrata, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Fleur. I don't have a question so much as just wanted to thank you, Chris, for your presentation. Like I spent many years living in Delhi. I haven't for the last few years, and especially through when things started getting really bad in the last decade. I spent some time also in the state of Haryana, which is often blamed for its crop burning as it relates to the cause of air pollution. So I really value the work that you're doing at OpenAQ. I also very quickly went to the website to search through Bogota because that's one of the cities we're working with, and they're very, very keen on looking at air pollution. And so just wanted to say that I'm going to send you an email later on just to connect with you and see if there's ways of connecting you to the city and sort of just seeing what more we can do together apart from this conversation over here. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you too. And the fact, I mean, here it is, we're all part of an ecosystem of working on these, and each of everything that we do in these different phases is necessary as a whole to make that change happen. So thank you as well for what you do.
So we also have Christian, who said he's originally from Bogota. So probably Christian has something to say about Bogota and the air pollution data. I'm not sure. Yeah, he's on mute. But Christian, if you have like any comments or anything to share with Namrata, working in Bogota right now.
I mean, yeah, the air pollution is terrible here, so I can relate with your comments on Delhi, but Yeah, definitely. I mean, I shared a couple of links with you, and it's work we do in Canada and that we do globally. So also happy to connect there.
Thank you, Christian.
Great. So we have 10 minutes left. I would like to now jump to the question of which do you think should be the first theme for next year, given that this is our last implementation working group session of 2022. Probably in this presentation, some topics emerge on how to use private and public sector information. Climate action has always been one of the themes that we have discussed. We had 2 sessions this year, but I wanted to open up to the group to discuss which theme should we have. Poncelet?
Yes, Flo, thank you. I'm looking at it from a point of view of us reviewing all the things we have discussed since this year in January, and just revisiting them, where we are, what has happened, and also thinking of, before the next meeting, of thinking of how, what's going to happen. Are we going to have a face-to-face ODC summits and stuff like that, you know, whereby some of those thematic themes that resonated very well this year with various speakers can come up sessions, because I think we have done well with all these sessions this year. Good starts for our first meeting of what happened, what are people doing, before we move into a particular thing that I think will be a starting point in the current meeting. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Thanks. Nati, any comments on the in-person side of the implementation working group?
So we have to be totally honest, we have no plans to do any in-person meeting in the foreseeing short future. We are expecting or waiting for the International Open Data Conference to take place, which would be kind of a really great international event where most of our community would be there. And then as a side event or even a workshop, we were hoping to have there an in-person meeting. As Chris said, also, we're also a small team with a small budget. So we're not in our capacity to invite everybody to participate, but we used to, and hopefully we'll get back to organizing side events as part of the international conferences that gather our community. There's no, at least me, myself, and I'm part of the academic committee. I've been part of the academic committee for the last 3 international open data conferences. So I have no information about the date or the venue, but I know it's in the making and it's in the conversations. So hopefully that would be something that we could do next year. And I totally agree with Poncelet, it would be great to do something like that. If there is an international open data conference, we will for sure make as I said, a side event or a workshop within the event, or we'll figure it out, but we'll make it work so that we can all meet up in person.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just noticed, Nate, that we have the International Data Festival from the Data for SDGs taking place in Uruguay on the 7th to the 9th of November. I just saw it on the mailing list. The mail just came in. So will ODC be attending that event? It's from the Data for SDGs.
Don't know yet, to be totally honest. We just found out about the dates a month ago. It's also an event that is being organized by the Digital Agency of Uruguay, but also the Statistics Office. So we're trying to figure out still more information about it, because it seems to be more prone towards in statistics office rather than open data offices from governments, which are our core points of contact. So once we have more information on that, we will probably provide, of course, more information. But as of now, we just know the information, as much information as all of you do.
Any other comments or recommendations or themes that we should cover on our first meeting next year? Christian, yes.
And I guess, yeah, I'm happy that Namrata is here, but I think one of the commonalities we've noticed, and I think Nathalie having some conversations too with Merlin about this, is kind of like the subjects we cover are very macro in a way in different countries. They talk about big like UN statistics or big country statistics, but a lot of the issues we're dealing with are very local and very community based. So I don't know, I'm obviously this is all up for discussion, but as a framing more, thinking about, I guess, the local aspects, like the very micro local, like very city, very community-based aspects of some of the work that we've been talking about and that others have shared. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are many examples of cities currently developing data strategies or data governance policies. Buenos Aires, London, yeah, we can find some examples on data strategies. They are not open data exclusively. I mean, like they are trying to find a balance between opening up data, but also like stewarding data or finding data sharing models that can be beneficial for the city. But yeah, that can be one of the first themes, and there are some government endorsers already in the network that we can invite.
And sorry, just as a follow-up, but not just cities, but also communities that might not be organized as cities. So say,
okay,
like thinking here in Colombia or even in Canada, indigenous communities are not necessarily associated with a colonial government or with a city government. So thinking about those as well, because they're interested in data, but they have different needs.
Probably we should do two different. I don't know what you think. One for cities and the other one for communities, or data sovereignty, and we can invite, for example, New Zealand has a data governance group. British Columbia in Canada also has a group. We invited someone from HIBOS, I think, in the first climate action meeting that we had working in the Amazonia in Latin America. Yeah, okay. Community-based and governance. Any other ideas?
I guess I would go back to that question that was asked about how do we encourage governments to open up their data, like maybe more of a conversation about that and what best practices are out there. That would be super interesting to us.
Perfect. I'm taking notes. And I think in that case, we should invite civil society organizations and activists or people actually like demanding data to their governments. Yeah, that's also a great topic.
We could also try to connect that to kind of international agreements, because there's a lot of kind of data, public value of the data being locked in reporting mechanisms. So there's a lot of countries that actually create the data to report to the UN on different things, but they don't open up the data. And it's just because they didn't even think about it. It's just like thematic ministries that do not have open data within their mindsets. And sometimes when you get to talk to them, they just open it up, but they just didn't even think about it. So maybe there's something to do advocacy around those international agreements, theme-based international agreements. That we actually have been working with that vision on anti-corruption and on climate change specifically, like the Paris Agreement, the Escazú Agreement. We're part of UNCAC to talk about anti-corruption. So it's like making advocacy into that reporting mechanisms. Because Chris, we're also 4 people in ODC. So we need to make sure to connect with the communities and make alliances to make our work actually doable.
So we already have 3 themes, and probably I will discuss with Wilfreda and the rest of the ODC team to discuss which specifically we can kick off in January. But I would like to thank you all for your ideas, and also thank Namrata. Yes, we have Alice.
Yes, I just wanted to say hello because this is my first time attending to these meetings. We are let's say the newest member of OpenAQ Charter, so I need some time to jump into this group and to see how everything goes. So maybe I will be next time more active during the discussion.
And how do you think this first meeting, your first meeting went? Did you like it? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was amazing.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as I was saying, this will be our last meeting, but we will reach you back with the theme for January 2023. So I would also like to take this opportunity to thank you all for being part of the community in a year where we didn't have COVID, but people were a bit tired of connecting to Zoom meetings, and you still were there every month. So we would like to thank you so much for your participation, and let's continue our conversation next year. And happy to see you all. Enjoy your winter holidays or your celebrations, and see you next year.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Thanks.
All.
Bye.
Muchas
Bye-bye.
gracias.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias a todos y todas.
Everyone.
See you
Have a nice
everyone.
holiday.
Thank you.